I lived alone in a small house in Upper Wisconsin. It's in a small community with a couple dozen houses in the area, but it's a few miles away from town. I liked not being in a busy area and just having trees surrounding the community. I worked a normal 9-to-5 job though, which meant driving into town most days and getting home around 6. This all happened last year, and afterwards, I sold my house and moved closer to town because the thought of it happening again still gives me chills. I woke up one morning at my usual time to get ready for work. I got dressed and made a bowl of cereal, then drove into town. At 5, I started the drive back home. The sun was setting, and by the time I pulled into my driveway, it was dark out. I headed inside and dropped my bag on the kitchen chair, then started searching through the pantry for something to eat for dinner. As I looked through the shelves though, I noticed something odd. The box of cereal I had for breakfast wasn't where I remembered to have put it. Actually, it wasn't anywhere at all. I looked around the kitchen for a minute, just really confused and thinking that I was losing my mind. I got frustrated after a bit and gave up, making a quick dinner and trying to enjoy the rest of the night. At 10 o'clock, my eyes were getting really heavy, so I turned off the TV and stumbled into the kitchen to fill up my water bottle before bed. Then I went over to the back door to turn off the back porch lights, but just before I switched them off, I saw something far back at the edge of the yard. A figure standing among the trees just past the reach of the lights. I had no way to get a closer look, so I just stood there looking at them for a few seconds until I saw them walk away deeper into the forest. It was really strange and gave me chills, but I wasn't really sure what exactly even happened. I was more confused than anything. I switched off the lights and went to bed. In the morning, I got ready for work again and went downstairs. But when I opened the pantry, the box of cereal was there, the one that I thought had been missing. It was sitting right where I'd left it. I figured I just missed it somehow and quickly ate and went to work. Sure I was that it was not there yesterday. Then the figure by my house came to mind and only got me more freaked out. It was Friday though, so I had the weekend to relax and collect myself. At 4, my boss let the staff go home early, which was a big relief for me because I couldn't focus anyways. I drove home, getting there just before 5. As soon as I stepped through the door though, something was off. I didn't know what, but I could just feel it. I walked into the kitchen and everything seemed to be in place. I froze. It came from the living room. "Hello?" I called out. It was quiet again. I stepped slowly to the entryway of the living room and scanned the room. I took a few more steps in and walked carefully through, checking behind everything. There was nothing and no one. I went back by the front door, preparing to check upstairs, when I heard sudden footsteps shuffling through the kitchen. I turned my head and looked down the hallway. A man was standing at the far end, looking at me. It was like my brain and body just shut down for a second as we stared at each other. I spun around and swung open the front door. I heard his footsteps coming up behind me as I sprinted out of the house and ran all the way to my neighbor's house. They called the police for me and let me stay with them until they arrived. The man was of course gone by then, but they found one of the window hinges to be broken, allowing access to the home even when locked. They also found some disturbing evidence of the man having likely been spending hours inside my house, eating my food and everything. There was no way to tell how long it had been going on for. After that, I put my house up for sale and stayed with some relatives until I was able to move. I don't know if that man was harmful, or if he was just living in my house because he could, but I could never shake the sight of him standing at the end of my hallway, staring at me with those dead eyes.
Attention horror fans! Are you ready for a one-of-a-kind addition to your collection? Get ready to show your support for our horror YouTube channel by owning me while you binge watch our spine-chilling content. But you must act fast, because these limited edition plushies will only be available for a short time. So don't wait. Click the link in our bio and sign up with your email to be among the first to know when pre-orders begin. These MJV plushies are the perfect way to support our channel while adding a unique and exciting item to your horror collection. So, what are you waiting for? Get ready to embrace the horror and sign up for your limited edition MJV plushie today.
I'm a 31-year-old female, and this happened when I was 29, back in 2020. My friend, let's call her Stacy, told me that she had a friend, who I'll call Brianne, that needed a dog sitter because Brianne and her husband were going on a vacation to California. Stacy knew I dog sat on an app called Rover, which is an app where you house sit random strangers' dogs, walk them, you name it. I thought it was the perfect opportunity, right? Brianne showed me around her house a week before I dog sat, while also letting me meet her huge husky named Bear. I'm not going to lie, it was a big husky, a little overweight too, but still adorable. Brianne told me that I was welcome to help myself to whatever food I wanted. The front door also included a lock where you punch in a number code to get in, so it was pretty secure. So, a week rolls around, and I showed up later on a Friday night the first 2 days. I was at work for most of the afternoon, went to feed the dog on my break, came back later at night, and would take Bear for rides in my car. I stayed up late watching movies, and let Bear sleep by me when it was time to go to bed. Anyway, after work on a Monday night, I hear a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole, and it was a guy that looked like he was wearing a black police uniform. I thought it was a bit odd, but opened the door to see what was up. "Hello, I'm looking for a George," he said. George? I thought. "Oh, no, there's no George here. I'm dog sitting for a friend. I've been here since Friday." Looking back, it was pretty stupid to tell a random person at the door I didn't know that I was alone. "Oh, okay. How long are you here?" he said. "Till Wednesday," I responded. "Oh, that's cool. Okay, sorry to bother you." And then he left. I was slightly weirded out and locked the door. I texted Brianne about what just happened. She pretty much just said, "Oh, don't worry about it," and shrugged it off. I thought that was weird too. Things were normal again up until I went to bed Wednesday at midnight. As I was laying in bed, the thought kept coming to my mind that I should make sure the front door was locked. So I got up and checked it. Luckily it was, but I still had a weird vibe. I fell asleep, then woke up at 3:05 a.m. to the dog barking like crazy. It freaked me out a little. I thought someone had broken in. I got up and went to the living room, where I saw Bear was growling and barking at the front door. I looked through the peephole and saw the same guy, with another guy this time, standing there in security guard uniforms. At this point, I was creeped out. Why would the same guy come back when he knew I was alone? I didn't bother opening the door this time. Two guys I didn't know, dressed like security guards at 3 a.m. I made sure all the doors were locked. When I saw that they had walked off, I opened the door and didn't see any type of security car anywhere. I still have to think Bear. I think his barking could have been what scared them off. I went back inside and fell asleep. I didn't bother telling Brianne because she was in Cali anyway. I'm glad to say I only stayed one more night after that. To this day, I still don't know who those guys were or what they wanted, and I haven't been back to dog sit since that incident. I was 16 at the time, and I lived with my single mom in an apartment. I was an only child, and my mom worked 2 jobs, so I was left home alone pretty often once I got old enough to take care of myself. In an apartment complex with a lot of other people living above and below me. On this day, my mom was working both jobs, so when she got out of her first shift at 2, she went straight to her next shift that started at 3 and ended at 11. It was summer, so I was out of school. I didn't have a car or anything, so all I could really do was walk around or stay home. I spent most of my morning watching TV and even took a short nap. At 6, I was getting hungry for dinner. We didn't have much of anything for me to eat though, so I took some cash off the counter and walked to the grocery store. It was a 40-minute walk, but at least the weather was nice. I got something small to snack on, as well as a frozen meal, then started the walk back. It was already dark out, but the whole road home was well lit and not in a dangerous area, so I wasn't worried. I'd done this plenty of times before. Halfway back though, I recognized that a man walking a ways behind me was taking all the same turns as me. I picked up the pace, but I never seemed to lose him. The final road led straight to the apartment complex, and there was nothing else down there, but he still trailed behind me. I was nervous, but also aware that it was most likely just someone else who lives in one of the apartments. I got to the entrance and went up to my room. I knew everyone who lived in my complex, or at least what they looked like, so I knew that whoever that man was couldn't get inside if he even was trying to follow me. I took my frozen meal out and started heating it up in the microwave. About a minute went by before I heard a buzz from the room below me, then from my room, and then the one above me. It was someone at the entrance door requesting to be buzzed in. This was something people would do often if they forgot their keys. They would ring all of the rooms in hopes that someone would be kind enough to buzz them in. Opening. Someone let them in. I walked around and put my ear against the door, listening carefully. I heard a knock at one of the rooms downstairs. Then someone answered. It was extremely difficult to hear any specific words, but at one point, I could have sworn I heard my name. My heart started racing. The door downstairs closed and footsteps started coming up the stairs. They walked right up to my door and stopped. I backed away from the door and tried to be quiet. They knocked again.
Hello, your mom asked me to check up on you. Can you just answer the door and let me know you're alright, please?
Not to make this sound bad, but my mom would never randomly send someone to check up on me while she was so busy with work. This was definitely something bad. I moved to the opposite corner of the room and dialed 911. The man continued knocking and calling out for me as the police were on their way. At one point, he even started kicking the door as if trying to knock it down. I was terrified and locked myself in my room. Eventually, the knocking stopped. Officers showed up a few minutes later. The woman living in the room downstairs told the officers that the man said he was a babysitter and had asked her if she knew which room was mine. She said he knew my name and everything, so she didn't even think not to trust him. It's pretty clear though that he was probably trying to kidnap me. Unfortunately, they had no way of identifying the man, aside from the woman's description, so he was never found. It still creeps me out though, wondering how the man knew my name and that my mom wasn't home. How long had he been stalking me for? And is he still? I was driving home from my friend's house. I lived 20 minutes away, which wasn't too far since most houses around here are spread out. The rain and lack of streetlights made it hard to see though, so I was driving slower and more carefully. 5 minutes down the road, I pulled up to a traffic light. I had the red light, but there was a blue car on the other side who was on the road, partially in the intersection. Its headlights and everything were on, but it was just sitting there at a green light. I couldn't tell if there was something wrong, or maybe they were asleep, but when the lights changed, I drove forward, slowly maneuvering around them. I tried to discreetly look in their car as I passed, but the rain on my window blocked most of my view. Only a moment after passing them and driving down the road again, the blue car turned and started following me down the road, so it wasn't broken down after all. I kept my eye on the mirrors. I wouldn't consider myself a paranoid person. The car's headlights started getting brighter in my mirrors as they pulled their car closer to what felt like... I looked back at the road, but saw a small light pop up on my dashboard. It was a signal that one of my tires was in the situation. I looked back in my mirrors, seeing the car still tailing me. They were so close, their headlights almost made it hard to even see the actual car. I was just 4 or 5 minutes away from home, nearing the entrance to the neighborhood, when my dashboard started flickering a new signal. Flat tire. My stomach dropped. The second I saw that signal, I put all the pieces together and was almost 100% sure that this car behind me had done something. I drove another minute, hoping to make it closer to home, but I could feel my car sinking to the left, and I was practically driving on the rims now. I had to pull over. The car behind me did the same. I should have called someone as soon as I parked, but I was so concerned and focused with what the person behind me was doing that it didn't even cross my mind. Though, even if I did call someone, it probably wouldn't have prevented what happened next. Once parked, 3 doors opened from the car, and 3 men came out. I only had a few seconds to prepare and react, but I was helpless and defenseless. They ran up to my car, 2 on my side and 1 on the other. One of the men came right up to my window, yelling at me to open the door and pointing a gun at me. It happened so fast, I was just in some dazed state. I started to reach for the door, but the man by the back door smashed something against the window, shattering it, then reached his hand in and opened the back door. They were all still yelling, both at me and at each other. The man in the back reached across, opening the other back door, then reached in front of me to open my door. I was still just sitting there, holding my hands up now to show I wasn't a threat. I knew there was no way out of this, even if I did have a weapon. Once my door was open, the man with the gun pulled me out of the car and slammed me on the ground. The oddest thing is while I was on the ground, looking out into the rainy pavement, all I was thinking about was how cold and wet the pavement was. Not about how I had a gun being pushed into the back of my head, or that I was being robbed and beaten. I think it was my head trying to distance myself from the traumatizing situation I was in. I wasn't on the ground for long before the men by the car called out, and the guy holding me down hit me in the back of the head, causing me to ricochet off the pavement. I wasn't even sure if he hit me with the gun or just his fist, because I was already numb. I'm surprised it didn't knock me out, though. I heard their car doors close, and then driving away. I rolled over, still in a daze, and tried to pick myself up. They'd taken my phone, so I was forced to drive my car home and call the police when I got there, which ended up denting and damaging my rims anyway. The investigation went nowhere, determining only that the suspects had purposefully placed small tire spikes in the road at the intersection I crossed them at. I got lucky to have only hit 1 spike, and for it to have caused less damage than usual. They likely planned to ambush me as soon as I hit the trap, but in the end, it didn't make a difference. I'm 24, and I lived alone with my dog, Bear, in a cozy townhome up until 3 months ago. I moved in when I turned 22, having a decent enough job. I loved the home, being the first place I'd ever rented for myself, but 2 years of happy living was ruined by this one night. It was gloomy outside and raining quite a lot. It was my day off, so I was sitting on a chair in my living room, scrolling on my phone. It was 8 p.m., which was just an hour before I usually went to bed. Bear had been sitting by the back door for a while, looking outside. He started whining and ran up to me, which was his way of communicating to me that he needed to go outside. I got up and let him out, then closed the door and stood in the kitchen. While it was just a townhome, there was a small fence separating the backyards, so I didn't have to worry about Bear running away or anything. Also, I should mention that Bear isn't a large dog at all. He's just fluffy and small, like a teddy bear. Not long, maybe 15 or 20 seconds after I let him outside, I heard him whimper and bark. It was very clearly a cowering bark, like he was running away from something. It scared me, and I rushed to the door and looked out, seeing Bear running back towards me with his tail between his legs. Once he was inside, I leaned my head up to be lurking by the fence, but nothing was there. He never does anything like that, so that made me really worried for him. I let him sit on my lap for the rest of the night. Through the next 30 minutes, he was constantly perking his head up and staring at the windows and doors, a different one each time. Then, after 45 minutes of sitting there, Bear turned his head and stared at the window behind me, lowering his ears and growling.
Bear?
I said, turning to look where he was looking, and right in the window, just a couple feet from us, was a man staring back at me. He was almost right up against the glass. I jumped up and screamed, stepping backwards as the man sprinted away down the side of the house. Bear started barking again from the sudden chaos. I closed the blinds and checked all of the others, making sure they were closed as well. From the quick glimpse I got, I didn't recognize the man. I didn't know who he was, or what he was doing here, or why he was staring at me. I tried to listen for any more indications that he was still around, but the rain outside was too loud, covering up any possible sounds. Bear seemed calmer though, so I stayed up for a while longer just to be safe, then went upstairs and had Bear sleep in my room with me. It took a long time for me to fall asleep, having a lot on my mind, but after an hour or so, I slowly dozed off. When I woke, Bear was standing up right by the bedroom door, staring at it. This was a freaky thing to see, waking up in the middle of the night, but not even seconds later, I heard something below me. A man talking. And not long after, a man on the other side of the house talking back. Their footsteps were loud, and they didn't even seem to be whispering either. It was like they didn't care if I knew that they were inside my home. My bedroom door was locked, but I had nowhere else to go. I went over to Bear quietly, trying to keep him calm, then picked him up and went over to the corner of my room, behind the bed. It took me a while to realize, but then it struck me that I hadn't heard any noises at all in the past minute. No steps or voices. This was when I took my phone out and called the police, whispering as softly as I could. As I told them my address, Bear started a low growl, then began barking and whining as 2 sets of footsteps started making their way up the stairs. I begged for the operator to send someone immediately. The 2 men started talking to each other again, but it was hard to make out their words.
Hey, we just want to talk. We're not here to hurt you.
I screamed, saying I called the cops and for them to leave. I was panicking, not knowing what else to do. There was a pause afterwards.
We're here to help you,
one of the men said. I didn't respond, as I was busy trying to muffle my crying.
Open the door!
It got quiet again. I walked back down the stairs. I couldn't tell where they went downstairs or if they'd left or not, but I was sure that it was just one set of footsteps that left the bedroom door. It was so quiet though, and I couldn't hear any breathing. In the far distance, the soft sound of sirens started to get louder. A sense of safety was finally coming back. Once the sirens got closer, I heard footsteps running out of the house downstairs, but now I was unsure of where the other man was. It seemed really unlikely for him to be by my door still, but I could swear I'd never heard him leave. I waited for the police to pull up and make their way inside. I heard them searching downstairs, then slowly make their way upstairs and knock on my door. I almost didn't want to answer, still thinking that other man had to be somewhere nearby. When I opened the door though, it was just an officer. I immediately told him about my concerns. He directed me out of the house as one of his partners continued searching, but nobody was found. The only thing they were able to find was watery footprints all around the house, as well as an unlocked window, which, to be honest, I wasn't sure if I kept locked or not. It terrified me though, feeling so confident that the other man was still there, never hearing him leave, but then there being no trace of him. It made it impossible to sleep at night, having this feeling of someone still in the house, watching me. I moved out 3 months ago. It was too much stress on my mind, having a loose end like that, especially since neither of them were ever identified or arrested. There was no clear intention the men had either, which is just another question added to the list of uncertainty. Even now, living miles away in a new apartment, I still sometimes feel like I'm not alone. I work at a convenience store at the corner of a small shopping strip. It's basically a smaller, local version of a 7-Eleven. Agreed to these shifts because they were always the slowest and required the least amount of work. All the parts of my job included tending to customers, filling the shelves, and taking out the trash, which pretty much meant I had nothing to do. It was the middle of winter at the time this happened, but I live in a warmer state, so it usually rains instead of snows. It was a light pour outside, but it was enough to keep most people away. On early mornings like these, I like to lean against the front of the building outside and smoke to pass the time. I wasn't supposed to, but there wasn't anyone to stop me. Along the shopping strip were maybe 8 or 9 other stores connected to ours. So, when I saw a car pull into the parking lot while I was smoking outside, I of course assumed they were coming to the convenience store. I burned out my cigarette and tossed it in the trash, then headed back inside and around the corner. There really was nothing to do, so I was just waiting for the customer to come in and leave so I could get back to being bored alone. After a few minutes of nobody coming in though, I walked back around the corner and checked outside the door. The car was still there, parked in a parking space nearby, but the headlights were off, and as far as I could tell, nobody was inside. Again, it was lightly raining outside, and all the other stores were still closed, so I was a bit confused as to where they went. I took one last look around, seeing nobody, then closed the door and went back inside. 30 more minutes of nothing went by, and I think I was just standing in the same spot behind the counter for the whole time, spacing out. I checked the time, seeing I'd only been at work for a little over an hour, and decided I should check the trash cans around the store and toss them in the dumpster out back. I walked around to each trash bin, putting the bag in the cart and replacing it with a new bag. As I was doing this, I heard a faint click sound being somewhat far away. It was impossible to tell what it was or where exactly it came from. In the moment it happened though, I barely even thought about it. It just didn't seem like anything worth thinking about. Just another random sound these old buildings made. Once I filled the cart with all the trash bags, I rolled it into the back room and unlocked the back door that led to the dumpster. I sighed, seeing as the rain was pouring down harder now, of course right when I actually needed to go outside. Regardless, I pushed the cart through the rain and over to the dumpster, which was directly across from the door. After tossing in all the trash, I turned back and started heading for the door. It had its door wedged open. I'd never seen anyone there earlier than 6, so it made me think. I went back inside to get out of the rain and went out to the front door and looked at the other store's door. All the lights were off, and it looked locked up and empty like it always was at this time. I thought for a few more minutes before figuring I had nothing better to do and went back outside by the dumpster and walked up to the open door. Again, all the lights were off, but it seemed to lead into a small closet-type room. I stepped inside, standing in between the doorway so as to not make it seem like I was trying to sneak in or something. Standing inside now, I could hear someone moving around in the other room, walking, opening drawers. It sounded like they were making a mess, which then got me thinking even more. Reassuring response from a neighboring store worker. The noises stopped. I waited a few seconds before I realized that this was not normal and something was definitely wrong. I stepped back outside and into the rain. As I quickly made my way back to my store, I recognized something was missing from the door I had just left. It took a second to figure it out. Then I looked down at the wedge that was holding the door open, seeing now that it was actually the broken door handle. I ran back into my store. Once I knew they were on their way, I went up to the wall connecting our stores and put my ear against it, listening to the suspected robbery taking place. Whoever it was had to have known that I called the police, because they were moving quickly now, running all around, tossing or knocking things over. After 30 seconds to a minute of this, I saw lights flash outside and heard sirens approaching the back of the building. I checked out the back door after a minute, seeing a less hectic scene, and walked out to talk to the officers. I thanked them for coming so quickly and gave them a statement. The man who was arrested was found with a pillowcase full of nearly $6,000 worth of stolen items. He also had an empty firearm, along with a variety of tools used to break down doors and locks. And, unknowing to me, he'd also broken into the store 2 spots down as well. It's unclear whether or not the man knew I was working at the time. Several large scratches were found on the back of our door handle, which may have been from a previous attempt. I lived with my older brother for about 4 years after I finished school. We shared rent on an apartment together since neither of us could afford anything on our own. But during the 4th year, my brother started making better money and he planned to move out once up until the last month of our lease at the apartment. My brother had basically moved everything out already and there was a lot of pressure on me to find somewhere quick, but with my extremely low budget, it wasn't easy. Eventually though, I stumbled across a listing posted by a homeowner renting out a room in their house. The man's name was Evan. He responded. We scheduled a time to call later in the day, and when we did, he explained all the details. He said he lived alone in the house and was renting out his spare bedroom, but I'd be able to use all the other rooms in the house too. It sounded great to me, so I agreed to it, and a couple weeks later, I tossed everything in a U-Haul and drove down to the house. Between this time, we'd been texting and calling, and he sent me parking in the driveway. The house was definitely smaller. He gave me a quick tour, then helped me unload all of my stuff into my room. Evan seemed like a regular man in his mid-30s, which was almost 10 years older than me, but I didn't really mind. He didn't hold conversations very well, and I dropped the U-Haul off. I Ubered back to the house, and by then it was almost 8 p.m., and I was really tired. Evan was on the couch watching TV, so I told him I was going to bed early, and I went to my room. All in all, it seemed like a decent place, and I was happy with it. I unpacked some more, then set up my bed. And by 9 o'clock, I was finally ready to sleep. I walked over to my door to lock it and turn off the lights, but as the lock was on the outside of the door. I stepped into the living room and asked Evan why the bedroom door locked from the outside. He looked confused and said he never noticed that, but he would switch it around tomorrow. I shrugged and said okay, then went back to my room. I was tired and not too worried about it, but it was definitely an odd find. I got in bed, and so I closed my eyes again. A minute later, I heard him walking back down the hallway, but as he was passing my room, he stopped. Quietly for maybe 15 seconds before I heard a click. He locked my door. My stomach dropped and I felt my face go cold as Evan walked down to his room. As soon as I heard his bedroom door shut, I got up quietly and went over to the door. I tried the handle and it wouldn't budge. I stood in shock for a few seconds, coming to reality that this man I just met has now locked me in a room. My fear started to turn into anger. I called out for Evan, telling him to open the door. It only took a second before I heard Evan run out of his room and over to my door. I heard him place his hand on. I swung the door open right away.
What the fuck was that?
I confronted him. Evan was stumbling words out, saying he just wanted to make sure he was safe because he didn't know me. I understood that concern, but locking someone in a room was not a smart way to go about it. I told him that I was going to pack up and leave in the morning, and I stayed up all night on the couch in the living room, waiting for the U-Haul store to open. At 9 o'clock, I looked into the hallway, seeing Evan's bedroom door was still closed, hopefully meaning he was still asleep. Then I drove straight there and drove the U-Haul back to the house. When I went inside though, Evan's bedroom door was open.
Evan?
I called out. I walked over to his room and peeked my head inside. His room was empty. I moved my eyes around the room in disbelief. Seeing as things were only getting weirder, I backed out and got straight to moving my stuff. I powered through 2 hours of moving boxes and taking apart my bed. I only had 2 boxes left. I ran inside and picked up another, then rushed to the front door until Evan appeared in the doorway.
Move,
I said. He stared at me, emotionless. After a few seconds, he stepped aside. I hurried past him and shoved the box in the U-Haul. The last box was half full of random food I kept from my old pantry at the apartment. I decided to just leave it. Evan was freaking me out, and I wanted to get away from him as soon as possible. I started closing the back of the U-Haul before Evan interrupted.
You forgot this.
He held out the last box.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
I grabbed it from him and climbed back in the truck. I felt him watching me as I stacked the box, and when I turned, he had his hand on the door. He started pulling it down, trying to close me in. I was able to stop him before the door was even halfway down. I shoved him on the ground, but he got up and ran. Not in the house, but off into the trees away from the house. I didn't know what to think, but I didn't care. I quickly shut the back door and drove away. My brother was nice enough to let me stay with him until I found a new place. I don't know what happened at that house, or what would have happened, but there was definitely something very wrong going on. I moved across the state to a newly built house. My previous landlord decided he wanted to sell his house, so when our lease agreement was up, he kicked me out. I decided to also lease this new house, but I was honestly really excited for this place. As soon as I moved in though, I noticed my neighbor across the street staring at me several times within the first couple days. He was a middle-aged man, but didn't seem to ever be away from his house. I tried to brush it off, assuming that maybe he was just curious about the new person in the neighborhood. But the more I saw him, the more I realized, and he never left. He just stayed in his house, watching. I would catch glimpses of him through my window and see him standing in his driveway at odd hours of the night. It was starting to freak me out. One night, as I was settling in for bed, I heard a noise outside. It was a scraping sound, like someone dragging a heavy object across the ground. I peeked out the window, and there was my neighbor, dragging what looked like a large ladder across his lawn. It was really late. I had no idea why he would be needing to do any work on his house at this time. I tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid because I was in a new place surrounded by new people, but I couldn't shake. I tried to calm myself and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I saw him outside again. This time, he was standing at the end of my driveway, staring at me through my window. I pulled the curtain shut and I tried to ignore him, but the feeling of him watching me gave me chills. I didn't like that he was by my driveway either, so I quickly got into my car and pulled out of the garage. He was back in his yard by then, but he watched me as I drove away. Things grew a lot worse from here. One night, as I laid in bed, I could clearly hear someone walking in the grass in my backyard, which was fenced in. I got up and looked out the window, but the footsteps stopped. I waited in my bed for probably 30 minutes, but I didn't hear any more footsteps. I got up and checked the window one more time to be safe, and far back in the yard was a figure. It was hard to make them out because it was so dark, but there was definitely someone standing there, watching me. I backed away and called the police, but the man had left before they arrived. I told them all about my creepy neighbor, but they told me there was no evidence of any wrongdoing and that my neighbor owned unless something more serious actually happened. I started to take precautions, locking my doors and windows and avoiding being outside as much as possible. Even then, I didn't feel much safer. I'd been at the new house for almost 2 weeks at this point, and even thought about breaking my lease agreement. Then something happened. I got home from work late and pretty much went straight to bed, but in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of something thud against the side of the house. It sounded like it was right up against the wall outside my bedroom though, which was on the second-story floor of my house. I slowly got out of bed, heart racing in my chest, and pulled the curtains back from my window. I jumped back and screamed. He was standing on a ladder, trying to look into my bedroom. Later, they caught him, trying to get the ladder down. While he didn't admit to what he was doing, it was very obvious. In the following days, one of my neighbors came by and explained that they had some weird encounters with that neighbor guy as well. They said they saw him looking through their windows as they were coming home from work one day. Part of me wonders if they could have prevented this whole thing from happening to me if they had just reported the guy. But either way, it's over now. I moved into my new house last year during winter. It was a beautiful, spacious home with a big backyard. It was my first house ever buying. Moving was a bit of a hassle though, because I was alone, so I had to move everything by myself. I pulled up with the truck early in the morning and shoveled all the... I finished pretty late, around dinner time. I went back outside and locked up the truck, planning to drop it off the following morning. I don't remember doing much for the rest of the night. I probably just watched something on my phone, but I didn't have my bed set up yet, so It sounded like someone was walking up to my porch. I sat up and listened carefully, looking at the front door. The sound stopped just before they reached the door, though. I waited for a while until I thought I was just hearing things and ended up falling asleep. I was certain I'd locked it before bed. I checked for any signs of someone walking around outside, but there wasn't anything. Mostly everything done by the end of the day. At 6, I went out for a quick dinner and got home around 7. As I pulled into my driveway, though, I saw something strange in the snow outside my house. I parked and got out. There were footsteps in the snow leading right up to my front door. I looked all around and tried to follow the footprints from where they came, but they ended by the sidewalk, which had already been shoveled. It could have just been a neighbor wanting to say hi, and that's the excuse I told myself to put me at ease. I finished the last of the unpacking, and before bed, I checked all the doors and windows. I walked up to the front door and immediately noticed it was unlocked again. I got my key and tried it, making sure everything seemed to work just as it was supposed to. Happening though, nothing was missing from the house, and there were no signs of an intruder. I mean, it was cold, wet, and snowy outside. If someone had come inside, they would have left watery shoe prints everywhere. I made sure the door was locked, then went up to my bedroom to shower before bed. Distinguish. Usually, I would assume it was nothing, but with everything going on, I had to check. I got dressed and walked down the stairs slowly. I turned the corner around the stairs, and right in the hallway was a man. He was facing me, standing still. I was in some sort of shock, frozen in place. After a moment, I sprinted back up the stairs and locked myself in my room. Rooms downstairs. I took this chance to call the police. As the man downstairs, after maybe 2 minutes, I heard the front door slam shut and the footsteps leaving the property. The police found nothing of use and suggested putting up security cameras and changing the locks on the door. I did both, but the man never came back. I almost wish he did so that I could catch him on the cameras, because now I feel like every day I'm just waiting in fear for him to come back. I'm not sure what he was doing or wanted to do, but I hope I never have to know.
I was 21 when this happened. I was shopping at Walmart getting some groceries. While I was there was a random woman that looked to be around my age who came up to me. She asked me who I was, and I told her my name. She said that I seemed interesting, and she had asked for my social media. I gave her my Facebook, and she left. But as she left, she kind of looked at me, giving me the creepiest smile, and kind of did the "I'm watching you" kind of gesture. I thought it was odd, but I didn't think too much into it, and I continued my shopping. I checked out, loaded my groceries in my car, and drove back to my house. When I got home, I had got a friend request from the same woman. I confirmed it, busy today, and that I'll talk to her later. She said it was fine, and a couple of hours later, when night fell, she had sent me another message. I couldn't believe what it said. She asked me if I wanted to hook up and have sex, that she's never had sex before, but that she wanted to try it with me. Don't worry, he doesn't need to know that. It'll stay between us. I told her I wasn't interested and that we can just be friends, but she said she wanted to be more than friends. I then replied back with, what part of "I'm not interested" aren't you understanding? She had totally went off on me after that, cussing me out and like totally losing it. My boyfriend came over to my house later that night to spend the night. When he arrived, I'd showed him all of the messages the woman sent me. He was disgusted, then someone screaming. It was the woman. I guess she had looked up my name and found my address, and she had actually showed up at my house. She was screaming like a psycho. "If I can't have you, nobody can." I told her to get the fuck off my property or I'd be calling the police. She said she had a knife on her and that if I didn't let her in, she was going to cut minutes. As soon as they arrived, they arrested her. I showed the officer all of the messages, and she said to drive to the police station to make a station. The both of us gave our statements, and I ended up filing a restraining order against her. I've since deleted the messages and blocked the woman's account. Now I only friend people that I actually know and trust. Please be careful who you talk to on social media, as you never know what could happen. I just want to say when all of this happened, I was 18, and I was young, innocent, and naive. Now that I'm in my mid-20s, and as one could imagine, I was excited to be on my own for once in my life. So excited to be on my own that I decided I was going to take summer classes on campus. That way I wouldn't have to worry about coming in when the big plus, it meant I could get away from my parents even faster. But mainly, all I could think about was boys. You see, I never dated anyone through high school, so I thought I would find my one true love at college. Because of course, that's what all the movies told me anyways. About 2 weeks go by, and me and one of my roommates, I had 4 by the way, we're all hanging out in the lounge area showing off pictures from Instagram. We were showing our friends, family. One of the guys was Tracy's boyfriend, and the other was Tracy's boyfriend's best friend. I'll call him Sean. Now, Sean was very attractive, and I even told Tracy that I thought he was hot. And she tells me she told Sean that I was interested in him, and he wanted to know if he could follow me on Instagram so he could DM me. At the time, I really trusted Tracy because she seemed like a really cool, chill girl. So I excitedly told her yes. He would always send me text messages first thing in the mornings, telling me to have a good day at class, and that he couldn't wait to FaceTime me that night. And we would FaceTime every night to talk to me. But it started to get annoying. He would text me almost every second of the day and try to FaceTime me at least 4 times. When I wouldn't respond to him, he would ask if I was okay, why I wasn't answering him, and if I was seeing another guy. It would make him really mad if I was, and that I wasn't seeing anyone. Like I said in the beginning, I was young and naive, so I didn't really see it as a red flag. Things kept going downhill though. It came to a point where he had started asking for pictures of me, either just selfies or pictures of me in the mirror. I wouldn't send them though because I just wasn't comfortable, and he would brush it off, saying he was fine, and that I could send him pictures of myself whenever I was ready. One day I was in class for a long time because it was lab, and it started at 7 p.m., and it wouldn't end until 10 p.m. that night. For those of you who don't know, labs in college can last from 2 to 4 hours, and mine just happened to be 3 hours that night. Once class ended, I headed to my dorm, and I took out my phone. I clicked the button on the side lighting up the screen. I had 380 unread text messages, 10 missed calls, and 3 voicemails from Sean. Before I could even react or read all the messages, my phone started to ring. Instead of it being Sean, it was on all those messages. I was still on the family phone plan. I don't know why, but I just lied to him and laughed it off, saying that I was just in a group chat with a bunch of girls from school. Once I got off the phone with my dad, I then quickly went to look at all of the messages I had gotten. Most of them were demanding why I wasn't answering him, and that he would come and find me if I didn't answer him. The voicemails were crude, and mostly of him saying that he was going to find me, and that when he did, he was going to punish me for not answering him. After this, I just completely blocked him on everything I could think of, completely freaked out about the whole thing. During that whole week, I felt like someone was watching me, but I just brushed it off as me being paranoid. At the end of the week, my roommate Tracy, who I'd been avoiding, then comes up to me shouting at me. Stop talking to him. I couldn't even get a word in because of how fast she was talking. She finally called me a self-centered bitch and then walked away. I went to class right after that, not realizing that I forgot to lock my dorm room. You see, I lived with 4 girls, and each girl had their own room, which would lock from the outside with a key. Well, when I came back from class, I noticed that my door was slightly cracked open. My heart dropped into my stomach. I hesitated going in. My hands were shaking terribly, but I finally got the nerve to push it open. Nothing. There was nothing out of place, or so it seemed. Even though there was nothing out of place, I could have sworn that I closed the door before leaving for class. Even though I don't remember if I locked it or not, I know for sure that I closed the door. So I asked all of my roommates, including Tracy, if anyone had gone into my room that day, and they all denied it, even Tracy. But I just knew in my heart someone had been in there. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't. So one weekend, when I knew that all of my roommates were going to be out of town, I switched dorm buildings, and I roomed with a girl that I'd gotten to be close friends with. After I moved in with her, I then told her all that had happened, and she said that she would walk with me to my classes, which thankfully, we had most of our classes together, except for the one night I had lab. She would walk with me to my lab, and then wait until my lab was done to then walk with me back to the dorm. One night though, she had actually gone out of town to go see her parents or something. I was walking back from my lab, and it had gotten really late that night. I heard someone walking behind me, but I didn't pay any attention to it, since class was just let out. But as I was walking, I could hear the steps getting closer, so I started to pick up my walking speed. At this point, I could tell someone was following me, and I was really afraid to look back. As the footsteps increased and got faster, I started running as fast as I could. Now let me tell you, I'm not athletic by any means. Somehow though, adrenaline probably, I was able to sprint to my dorm building, still hearing someone running behind me. And I thankfully already had my keycard out to get into the building. I then swiped it on the door and then slammed it shut behind me. Looking up from slamming the door, I see someone who's probably about 10 feet away from the door staring at me. Even though the person's hood was up and I couldn't see their face, I could clearly see that they were looking at me. And I just knew that it was Sean. Not wasting any more time, I go to the RA that was up that night, now bawling, telling them what had just happened. He called the police, and I then told them everything that happened. But they basically just said that they couldn't do anything since I didn't see his face. After all this happened, I called my friend and I told her what happened, and she never went out of town again if I ever had any late night classes. I eventually ended up deciding that college just wasn't for me, and I dropped out. I moved back to my home state, and I went to cosmetology school to become a hairdresser. I still haven't dated anyone yet though. Maybe it's the fear of something like that happening again. I'll never know. I do know that I'm super careful with who I talk to now, and who I give my social media and phone number to. I'm still scared to go to places by myself, even though it's been years and I'm states away. Even so, I really hope that I never see Sean again. My name is Zach, and this is the true story of what happened when I was just 13. It was September, and I'd just gone back to school after summer break. Everything was fine for the first week. I was happy to be reconnecting with my friends and generally being back to school, but I didn't know it would be so short-lived. On that Sunday night, I had dinner with my family before heading up to my room, and I glanced out of my window to see an orange van parked there. Not out of the ordinary, as I lived on quite a busy road, so I thought nothing of it, and I had played some video games before bed. The morning after, I was awoken by the sound of a rough engine, and it was the same orange van pulling up to the same spot. I thought it was a little odd at how early he parked up, but again, I just went about my day. It took me around 6 to 8 minutes to get to school, so I always walked there. Everything in my day was going fine. While at lunch, I decided to have my crafty cigarette, as I did behind the bike sheds at school. But when I looked left, all I felt was a chill go down my spine, as I had then seen that same orange van parked across the road. This happened until Friday, before a man around 50 to 60 jumped out and then approached me. At this point, I was really scared, and I didn't know what to do. The man, who I'll call Ron, had started asking me many questions about me and my family. If we argue often, how many people I live with, and so on. I was already freaked out at this point, so I just ran home as fast as I could. When I finally got home, I was thinking that maybe he got the hint, and I felt just a little bit more relaxed. Until an hour later, and he was then parked in the same place. At this point, I was so happy it was the weekend. I decided to stay inside all weekend long and just play video games with my friends online. It had turned 6 p.m. on a Saturday, and I was feeling so relaxed. I hadn't even looked out the window. I was about to start a new match with my friends, but my phone rang. I looked, and it said no caller ID. I thought it was my mother, as she would often use her work phone to call me and my siblings. I answered the phone, and as I usually say hello, I got no answer back in return, just very heavy breathing. This happened about 4 times before a voice then finally spoke.
"Hello, Zach."
I instantly recognized it. It was Ron. I started to panic, and I looked outside, and there he was. He was looking up out of his car window at me and smiling. I was way too scared to tell any of my family, so I phoned my friend, who I'll refer to as Jack, and I told him everything. He instantly knew that I was telling the truth because he had noticed the orange van around the school too. We spoke about it for over an hour before we decided to call it a night, but as soon as the call finished, my phone rang again. This time I answered, and I then asked, "What do you want?" To which he then replied back with,
"You. I've been watching you closely on Instagram."
I just hung up after that, and I went to bed really scared. The day after this happened, my friend Jack came to my home to walk with me to school after I called him to tell him the orange van was still outside. We left my home, only this time as we were walking, the orange van had followed us slowly. This is when we decided to run. As we got to the end of my road, the van sped up and then blocked us off. Ron stepped out of the van, grabbing my arm, then saying,
"I want you. You're coming with me."
He also put Jack in the back of the van to stop him from talking too. I then asked him, "Why are you doing this? Where are we going?" To which he then replied back with,
"I already told you. I want you. We're going home."
As he then shut the van door. Me and Jack panicked as Ron started driving away with us. We searched everywhere in the van for something to help get us out. Just as we had given up, Jack had spotted a piece of the van's metal lining that was loose. We started to pull it off as quietly as possible. As it finally came off, it made a loud noise, and Ron then banged on the van, shouting at us,
"Quiet!"
while driving. Me and Jack then took the metal and we forced open one of the doors. Ron was driving at a high speed, so we had no choice but to jump out. There were 2 people who were walking down the street at this time. They came to our aid as we jumped, and they kept us safe until the police came. Me and Jack told the police the full story, but Ron and his van were never found. I'm not really sure, but I think he was using fake plates on the van. How else would he have not been found? I know this might sound fake, but I really was almost kidnapped by this psycho in his van. A month after all this happened, I had finally started to rebuild all of my confidence, with all of the security measures in place. I was finally starting to feel like the old me, and I made sure that my Instagram account was private. I came home with my mother from school, feeling happy, and decided to play online games with Jack. Later that night, I got a notification on Instagram, a new message request. I opened it, and my blood turned cold. Upon reading it, it said,
I'm still watching you.
And I dropped my phone to the ground. After that happened, I deleted all of my social media accounts from that day forward. And I'm probably not going to make any new accounts for a really long time.
Dear Your Honor, I've been a model inmate for 5 years and have my first parole hearing in 2 months. I never asked the state for anything, but I'm writing this letter, pleading for your intervention. While I accept my responsibility for my actions that day, mitigating circumstances led to it, and I implore you to listen. I was laid off from work due to the economic shutdown. As my unemployment benefits ran out, I started delivering food for various restaurants as an Uber Eats driver. Normally, this can be a pretty lucrative side job, but my hometown was small and rural. I often had to make deliveries 20 or more miles out of town. In truth, most of my profits went towards keeping the gas in my tank filled, but I was still making just enough to cover most of my rent. As such, I kept at it, hoping it was a temporary setback until I found a new job. I delivered to some sketchy places in my time with Uber Eats, but none were as off-putting as the trailer park I pulled into that day. Children ran between trailers, unattended in their underwear, with dirt smeared all over their bodies. People shambled like zombies in front of their homes, visibly intoxicated. One woman in a rocking chair had a hypodermic needle sticking out of her arm. Unsure of where to go, I checked my phone and saw one note, RV. I drove through the trailer park until I came to the end of the park. Sitting in one of the lots was an ancient RV, rusted with age and visibly covered in dirt and other stains. Most of the windows were busted out, and all of them were covered with black garbage bags. I stepped out of my car with the bag of food, wading through the beer cans and liquor bottles that littered the way. The air outside smelled of ammonia, so I held my breath as I tapped against the door. I nearly dropped the bag of food when the man answered. The smell from the RV reminded me of my grandmother's old cat, a thick smell of days-old piss that nearly knocked me over. Through watering eyes, I saw my customer. He was over 6 feet tall, pale-skinned, bare-chested, and bald. While he wasn't overly muscular, 2 things immediately raised my guard. The first were his tattoos. Over his left breast was a swastika, and on the right, a Confederate flag. While this marked him as a man I did not want to have dealings with, the large handgun tucked into his shorts made me want to run screaming to my car. The man rested his hand on the gun. "The hell you want, limp dick?" I tried to answer, but my mouth had gone dry. I swallowed and tried again. Uber Eats. You ordered Chinese?" The man frowned at me. "Took you long enough, didn't it?" I tried not to let out a breath of relief when he took his hand away from the gun. He stuck it into one of his pockets and pulled out a wad of cash, and I relaxed. I'm from the rural red state, so neither the tattoos nor the gun were uncommon. Maybe I would get out of this with a story to tell and a generous tip. "Bubba! Bubba!" Something thudded from one side of the RV, growing closer until another man came out. He had matching tattoos, but was shorter and squatter than his roommate. He proudly held up a baggie full of what looked like rock salt. "Latest batch is ready. Just need your seal of approval." He slapped the bag into the other man's hands. Then his eyes widened when he saw me. "Oh, sweet! My crab rangoons!" Bubba turned and spat. "Seal of approval, my ass. Last batch you cooked left up half the customers blind and the other half dead. You try it out, Rooster." Nothing doing, buddy. I'm the cook. You're the manager. That was the deal. What kind of cook doesn't try his own? Bubba trailed off as he stared at me, his lips parting into a cruel smile revealing rotten teeth. Say, friend, you look like you've been working real hard. Come on in. Kick your feet up for a while. Oh, no. I stammered. I mean, it's really nice to offer, but I've got other deliveries I need to make. Bubba pinned me to the RV in a flash and placed the gun to my head. I wasn't asking. They dragged me inside, Rooster cackling the whole time. The inside of the RV was even dirtier than outside. They pushed me towards a stained and torn couch, and I tripped over discarded pizza and cereal boxes as I crashed into it. Bubba was on me a minute later, the gun placed to my head. Snort this, or I'll blow your head off. Rooster placed some of the crystals on a fold-out table and grounded them into a powder with the palm of his hand, then handed me a straw from a discarded Coke can. I had never tried any hard substance before. I didn't even drink that much, but with a gun placed to my head, I did what I needed to do to survive. My nose and throat were on fire as heat washed over me. The world erupted into flames while Rooster and Bubba transformed. Their skin melted, revealing skeletal torsos with smoking embers for eyes. They cackled again as I bolted from the table and out the door. I climbed into my car as fireballs exploded around me and hit the gas. But the world was the same barren hellscape everywhere I went. One of the creatures appeared before me, so I screamed and plowed my car into it, and the world went black. When the police pulled me from my airbag, the world was back to normal. But they slipped a pair of handcuffs on me as the EMTs finished zipping up a mangled old lady into a body bag. I told them my story, but the RV was long gone, and the county attorney said I made the whole thing up. The jury agreed and sentenced me to 10 years for driving under the influence, reckless endangerment, and vehicular homicide. I was content to serve my sentence until yesterday, when 2 new inmates were brought in. It was Bubba and Rooster, and they smiled at me as their cell doors closed. They remembered me. That's why I'm begging you, Your Honor. Please transfer me to any prison but this one to serve out the rest of my sentence. For some context, I live in a major city and currently don't do a lot of driving due to ongoing issues with my car, plus the pandemic has made me turn to more delivery apps in general. So the other day around 1 p.m., I decided to order some lunch after doing a lot of cleaning. I placed the Uber Eats order and found something to watch while I waited for the food. Within a few minutes, a driver accepted the order, and I noticed right away that the driver, Anthony, was on a bike, didn't have a profile picture or any deliveries on record. At first, I wasn't alarmed at all. I was almost amused, like, wow, I guess I'm this person's first ever customer. But then, a full 30 minutes passes with no driver movement on the app. And at this point, I think maybe something is glitching out or the driver is stuck. I contact support via the chat option, and they ended up assigning a new driver because they couldn't reach the first one. Odd, but whatever. Now is when it starts getting a little weird. The new driver assigned is in the same exact spot as the original driver was. They also were on a bike, also have no profile picture, and have no prior deliveries as well. And this driver's name was Lori. I let another 20 minutes pass with no driver movement before I messaged them myself and said, "Hi there, is there any issues with the order?" The app shows that the driver saw the message, but no response. All this time, I'm checking to see if Uber Eats is maybe experiencing issues. None that I could find, but At this point, I'm definitely weirded out. I'm mostly just hungry. So I contact support again to request some assistance. They reassign the driver again and apologize for the inconvenience. Same deal. They also tried to contact the driver with no response. Finally, the third driver assigned is the exact same scenario. Same spot, on a bike, no profile picture, no prior deliveries. Only this time, the name is Robert. And before I can react and go about canceling the order, because at this point, I'm tired of dealing with this, he suddenly has my food and immediately messages me the following. Hello, I have your food. What's your phone number? And I respond right away with, I'm not super comfortable giving my phone number out. You can just meet me when you get here. He responded again with, what's your number? Be there in 10. How old are you? And at this point, the alarm bells were going off, and I contacted support immediately to have the order canceled and get further assistance. I get connected to Uber's safety team, who informs me that the order has been canceled. I'll be refunded, and started taking down the details of the strange interactions. As I'm giving the woman on the phone the info she needs, I'm starting to calm down, thinking this was just some creep or something, and that's when I heard a man's voice at the front door.
Hey, Sarah, I have your food.
I can't even describe the chill that went down my spine because of the way he said it. Making things even worse, the Uber safety woman on the phone with me heard him as well and goes,
Is that him? Well, we canceled the order.
I poked my head around the door. The main heavy door was open. Metal screen door was closed and locked, but allowed us to see each other. And when he saw me on the phone, he went from smiling to looking furious. He suddenly got right up against the door and kept asking who I was on the phone with. And at this point, I've started asking him to please leave because he's making me uncomfortable. But he was getting more and more angry. And at this point, started pounding on my door and shaking the doorknob while shouting to let him in. The woman on the phone was asking if I was okay. The man was still shouting. So basically, I'm in full meltdown mode at this point and hurriedly closed the heavy door to lock it. The man is becoming borderline belligerent as he kicks my door, and the woman tells me to call the police. He ended up walking away from my house about a minute after that and backed up to the sidewalk, and for a moment, I thought he finally f***ed off. So I finished my conversation with the Uber safety woman so she could submit the report. Once she submitted it, I called the police and told them what happened. They weren't incredibly helpful at first since he didn't actually break in or put his hands on me, and they told me if he came back to call again, and they would send an officer out. I did end up having to call them again and give a full report, plus the description of the man since he didn't end up leaving right away. He stayed in the neighborhood for almost 20 minutes, according to one of my neighbors. After she heard the yelling, she saw the man I described walk back up from my house to the sidewalk and hop into a truck with another man in the passenger seat. And apparently, they just sat there, staring at the people walking by and being incredibly sketchy. And that's when she walked back towards my house and asked me what happened. Luckily, she was able to give the cop a description of the vehicle and the other man as well. So, basically, this was a very bizarre and uncomfortable experience, and I wanted to share it to maybe see if anyone has experienced anything else like this, because honestly, I'm still pretty shaken up, and will be avoiding delivery apps for quite a long time. I have OCD with borderline BPD. For those of you without a PhD, that means I experience uncontrollable urges to repeat a certain behavior while being constantly stressed that people in my life will abandon me. If you'd like me to simplify that, I'm a neat freak and control freak. My entire life, I've been in and out of relationships, in and out of therapy, and bounced between jobs. When the pandemic hit, believe it or not, my life improved exponentially. Now, I could work remotely from home and be the master of my own castle. No pesky visitors, no unwanted intrusions on my time or space, and nobody but myself to clean up after. But now, looking back, those early days of quarantine feel like a more innocent time. Back when I was more innocent and naive to believe that the virus was a simple contagion. Back before I got the glasses. I lived alone at the end of a cul-de-sac. My house had been a foreclosure that I'd snatched up when the economy had cratered, expecting to sink some money into it and then flip it. But I'd gotten lazy and stayed. On one side, my next-door neighbor were the Ruggles, an elderly retired couple. On the other side were the Hinderlands, a family that had 3 energetic rugrats. I felt boxed in a very different vibe. The Ruggles' yard was impeccably manicured, with gardens of prized rose bushes and heirloom tomatoes, and the Hinderlands' yard, well, it looked like a shaggy recycling center for used Fisher-Price playsets. I tried to steer clear of both of their yards and activities, carefully checking from various interior windows to ensure the coast was clear before venturing outside. The glasses seemed like a goof. I always kept a well-stocked inventory of household cleaning supplies. But once I started my online searches for industrial-grade cleaning solvents and PPE, suddenly my whole worldview of pandemic-related spam began flooding my inbox. They were called coronavirus eyes. They weren't being sold by any of the online wholesalers I frequented. They were simply a pop-up ad that must have been triggered from my daily shopping habits. The ad said, "Now you have the power to see COVID-19. Our remarkable scientific breakthrough technology means you never have to fight the virus without seeing it." Imagine a pair of aviator goggles with polarizing orange and green lenses. Price, $289.99. Cabin fever, a fear of germs, and poor impulse control are a toxic combo. The glasses checked off so many of my OCD boxes that even if it was a scam, which I'm pretty sure that it was, I couldn't resist the sales pitch. So of course, I bought the coronavirus eyes, paying an additional $59.99 for same-day delivery. However, I kept my expectations low. How could a pair of goggles possibly show you COVID-19? An hour later, I watched as the FedEx driver drove around the cul-de-sac. I got my face mask and gloves, reaching to the front door, just as the package was being dropped off on the welcome mat. "Thanks," I said to the FedEx guy. "Starve the virus. Don't become a statistic." I ripped open the box and unraveled the bubble wrap. The goggles were heavier than I expected. The added heft, as well as the glossy polarized lenses and finely machined assembly, made them feel like legitimate virus-displaying eyewear. I took a deep breath and slipped them on. And nothing. Just a blurry-eyed view of the world. No bright particles wafting along the air currents. No swirly patterns of neon-colored spores. Not a single speck of lethal virus. My disappointment quickly gave way to serenity. There wasn't an airborne viral activity in my foyer or front yard, because my little corner of the world was virus-free. I made a quick scan of the Ruggles house with the coronavirus eyes and saw a stranger's face peering out of their attic window. I immediately recoiled, almost tripping on my front porch rocker. The face wasn't that of Mr. or Mrs. Ruggles, and as far as I knew, they weren't hosting anybody and weren't receiving visitors. I carefully skirted around my hedges and garage, getting into position for a better view. I peeked around the corner. The face in the attic window was hairless with a pug nose, buck-toothed grin, and a set of bulging blue eyes that gave my heart palpitations. The eyes were so grotesquely large for the rest of the face that it looked like racquetballs had gotten lodged in the orbital sockets. Think Marty Feldman eyes on steroids, and they were staring expectantly down the street, as if waiting for someone. I slipped off the coronavirus eyes, and the face in the attic window vanished. Panic and confusion struck me. I resisted the urge to put the goggles back on, because if the face was visible again, then the coronavirus eyes were showing me something that nobody else could see. Sirens. Ambulance sirens. They were getting closer. I slipped back on my goggles and checked the attic window. The face was gone. The sun was going down behind the tree line, plunging the cul-de-sac into dusk. The blaring ambulance came speeding around the corner, right into the Ruggles driveway. I retreated to my front porch rocker and watched with morbid fascination as the emergency techs raced inside the house with a stretcher. Less than 5 minutes later, they were wheeling poor Mr. Ruggles back to the ambulance. He was very pale and gasping for breath. Mrs. Ruggles, beset with tears, followed along. A nagging little voice in my head told me to put the glasses back on. Reluctantly, slowly, I did so. The coronavirus eyes revealed 2 more people. One was actually riding atop the stretcher. It was a massively obese woman in a black dress, straddling Mr. Ruggles' chest. Her folds of fat stacked atop each other like layers of blubber, or sagging so low they nearly engulfed him. She wore a dark, wide-brim hat that veiled most of her face, except for her very prominent quadruple chin. Her immense weight appeared to be the cause of Mr. Ruggles' belabored breathing. Walking alongside the stretcher was a similarly dressed woman, black dress and wide-brim hat. Yet she was short and thin. The only part of her face I could see was a sharply hooked nose and upturned chin. The end points of the nose and chin were so extremely curved they almost touched. She was carrying a cast iron teapot that was dispensing a plume of green gas. She held the teapot near Mr. Ruggles' face, directing the noxious-looking fumes into his airways. Neither of the emergency techs nor the Ruggles seemed to be aware of the pair of black-clad women. I lifted the goggles off my eyes. Both women were invisible to the naked eye. The whole outrageous procession loaded into the ambulance, and off they went, sirens blaring into the dusk. I turned and headed back inside my house, but that nagging little voice began trumpeting inside my head. I slipped back on the coronavirus eyes. That face with the freak show eyes was looking out from my office window, staring down the street like it was waiting for someone to arrive. I got in my car and hightailed it out of the cul-de-sac. I never went back. I finally flipped the house, and from the makers of the coronavirus eyes, I ordered a pair of Ebola ears. Do you think there's a link? I finished buttoning my shirt. It was tailor-made, each button an equal measure apart, polished uniform black dots against the navy blue fabric. Both the shirt and my dress pants were freshly pressed. I took one last look in the mirror and sighed at my hair. My hair was always the hardest thing to manage, making sure it lined up perfectly and no strand was out of place. That's why instead, I opted to keep it short, buzzed nearly to the scalp. It was practical Not stylish, which was more important. At the same time, though, I wish I could exhibit more style before I left for the date. I was cutting it close, but I felt the familiar tug dragging me towards my room. My bed was neatly made, the covers tucked in at the corners, and a single pillow set at the center of the headboard. The books that lined my shelves were all meticulously arranged in order, alphabetically by the author's last name. And yet, my eyes glanced over the contents of the shelf against my will, double-checking, even though I knew there was no reason for them to be out of place. I was about halfway to the door when the tug pulled at me hard. My fingers twitched and itched like a million unseen insects swarming over them, even though I knew that it couldn't be the case. They're clean, goddammit. Just ignore it. It was a battle that raged in my mind every day for as long as I can remember, and a battle that I always lost. I huffed in disgust and ran to the bathroom. I clanked on the hot water to the faucet. Steam rose, fogging the mirror, and the sting of the scalding water was an instant relief. The soap helped protect against the burn, and the foam provided a soothing relief to the battlefield of my warped mind. 10 minutes passed before my hands were scalding red, but undeniably clean. It was enough for me to finally make it to the car and check the time. Shit. I pulled up to the restaurant 15 minutes late, but Kelly greeted me with a smile and waved her hand. Nodding towards her, I walked over and sat across from her. She said something to me, but I couldn't hear it at first. One was her face, perfectly symmetric, with piercing blue eyes that stood out even more against her pale hair and skin. The other was the piece of napkin that clung to the bottom of her glass. She talked for 5 more minutes about something, but in the middle of her story, I reached across to grab her glass and pulled the small piece of fabric away before sitting it back in front of her. I tried to pretend like nothing had happened, but her eyes followed my hands during the whole exchange. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah. I awkwardly cleared my throat and took a sip of my water. Sorry, I'm just a little nervous. I don't date much. The date went well enough after that. I listened to her jokes, genuinely laughed, and felt relieved that Kelly was more than just a pretty face. Even if that's why I asked her out. I managed to keep my triggers under control, stopping only once to polish the watermarks of our silverware. This caused another upturned look from her, but it stopped when the waiter tripped and spilled a plate of ravioli all over me. The dish was cold, apparently being returned by an unimpressed customer, and yet it still felt like it burned as the dark red sauce poured over me, staining my meticulously arranged wardrobe. Without a word, I bolted up from my chair and practically ran to the bathroom. I already had the hot water cranked up, waiting for the steam to rise, when the kind old attendant approached me. Ooh, my sir, it looks like you've had... Get the fuck away from me! My outburst startled him into silence, but I didn't care about hurting his feelings. The grip in my mind tugged me towards the water, noticing the steam had risen just right. I plunged my hands in, savoring the burn, then filled my hands with soap and began rubbing. The sauce was like a malicious aura, staining my whole body, making me feel unclean. But what could I do? I couldn't exactly take off my shirt, so I focused on the only thing in my control and washed my hands over and over, so thoroughly and loudly that I didn't hear a knock at the door. Ian? Kelly's voice came through the door. Is everything all right? Yeah, I'm fine, I stared in shock as she entered the men's room. She gasped and looked down at my hands, red and throbbing from spending so much time under hot water. But then her face rightened itself. She took both of my hands in her own. A soothing coolness washed over my fingers, and it felt clean. She stood silently for a minute, holding my hands until my breathing steadied. "You have OCD, huh?" I stared at her, but she kept talking. "I've got a cousin with it, but you're showing a lot of the signs that he does." Yeah. The admission felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. "I'm sorry for ruining our date." "I wouldn't say that." She smiled, and mischief lit up her eyes. "Want to head back to my place?" I hesitated. How about mine? I could use a shirt with less Chef Boyardee." She laughed, and we headed back to my car. I never felt happier than I did in those few minutes with Kelly. She was extraordinary, a welcome addition to my collection. As I parked the car in the garage, I saw her slumped in her seat, murmuring the pills I crushed in her drink were already taking effect. After that, it was a simple matter of loading her up in my arms and taking her back to my room. I set her on the table, my bucket already arranged to catch the excess blood after I slit her throat. I pulled on my pair of rubber gloves and admired my collection lining the walls. A dozen pristine, symmetrical faces stared back at me with empty eyes. As always, I couldn't think of the first mask I collected. I hadn't used sedatives, and her face was frozen in horror, the terror eroding the evenness of her face. All that work for nothing. But I got better with practice. Most people with OCD have the same obsession with symmetry that I have, but most of them don't have the resolve to do anything about it. Thank God I'm also a sociopath, I thought, as I picked up the scalpel and got to work.